To finish section 6.2, we're going to spend a few moments reviewing some of the information we learned earlier, and then finish by learning how to use our calculator to evaluate the 6 trig functions. The review question says, a point is on the unit circle in quadrant 3 with y-coordinate -4/5. If I sketch a little diagram of a unit circle, being in the third quadrant puts me down here, and I know that the y-coordinate is -4/5. In order to evaluate the 6 trig functions, I'm going to need the x-coordinate. Well, if it's on the unit circle, I know that the equation x squared plus y squared equals 1 must be true for all points. I have a y-coordinate, so I can substitute that in and solve for x. X squared plus 16/25 equals 1. I'm going to change 1 into a common denominator, so 25/25 minus the 16/25 tells me that x squared is 9/25, and I know that x is plus or minus the square root of both the numerator and the denominator, or 3/5. How do I know which one to choose? Am I going to use both? Well, if I was told that I'm in quadrant 3, I know that both the x and the y coordinates are negative. So for this problem, my x is only the -3/5 answer. Now that I know x and y, I can answer all 6 trig functions. Going in order, cosine, and I'm going to use theta, is the x-coordinate, which is -3/5. Sine theta is the y-coordinate, which is, we were told, -4/5. And tangent is y over x, which is a fraction -4/5 divided by -3/5. -4/5 divided by -3/5. To simplify that, negative divided by negative I know is positive. 4/5 times 5/3. In order to divide, you flip the second fraction. Those cancel, and I wind up with tangent theta is 4/3. To do the other three, secant, cosecant, and cotangent, those are just the reciprocal of these three. So secant, reciprocal is -5/3. Cosecant, reciprocal is -5/4. And cotangent, reciprocal is 3/4. So knowing one point and knowing that you're on the unit circle can give you the second coordinate in an ordered pair. Once you have the coordinates, you find the first 3 trig functions, and if you know that the second 3 are just reciprocals of the first 3, you can evaluate all 6 trig functions very quickly. Second question says, what does theta between pi over 2 and pi really mean? Well, if you're comfortable working in radians, you know that pi is 180 degrees and pi over 2 is 90 degrees. And theta is just an angle, so that tells me that when I'm examining points on a unit circle, the angle that I'm going to use, initial to terminal, is going to wind up somewhere in the second quadrant. So I know that I'm dealing with angles that are in quadrant 2. And I also know that the ordered pairs are going to be a negative number and then a positive number. And the reason why this is important is highlighted over here. Once I know what quadrant I'm in, I know whether my sines and cosines are going to be positive or negative. For example, in this quadrant, cosine is going to be a negative number, sine is going to be a positive number, and tangent, which is the ratio of the y over the x or the sine over the cosine, is also going to be negative. And once I know those 3 again, I'll know that secant is going to be negative, cosecant will be positive, and cotangent will be negative as well. Okay, the last thing for section 2 is how to use your calculator to evaluate trig functions. I'm given 2 numbers, one of which appears to be radians because there's no unit, and one of which appears to be degrees because I have a little degree symbol here. Your calculator can evaluate both. We just need to make sure that you're in the correct mode. When you press the mode button on your calculator, looking at the third option down will tell you whether you're in radians or degrees. So to see this in action, I'm going to take the secant, cosecant, and cotangent of 30 using a calculator. On our calculator, if we press the mode button and look at the third option down, I can see that degree is highlighted, but the first set of questions involves radians. So I'm going to go down, make sure radians is highlighted, press enter, and then quit out of the screen. Now I'm ready to evaluate functions. Since secant is 1 over x, I need to find 1 over cosine. So I'm going to do 1 divided by, cosine button is right here, 30 radians. I know that I'm entering in radians because I just changed the mode into radian mode. And when I press enter, I find out that secant is 6.48. Second question says, what is the cosecant? I know the cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so I'm going to do the same thing but in a slightly different manner. I'm going to use sine 30 radians, and then I'm going to use the inverse button, which is right here. This is just a faster way of saying 1 over, and I get as an answer negative 1.01. If you look carefully, you can see that above sine, cosine, and tangent are sine negative 1, cosine negative 1, and tangent negative 1. Those are not reciprocals. There's a difference in the notation that we use for some other trig functions, which we'll get to later. We don't want to use the second functions above sine, cosine, and tangent. You can use the reciprocal button right here. And then the third question said, find the cotangent of 30 radians. I know that the definition of cotangent is x over y, and that's the same thing as saying cosine over sine. So I'm going to say cosine 30 divided by sine 30. And when I press enter, I find out that the cotangent of our angle of 30 radians is negative 0.156. So now that I've had the calculator done these, I'm going to go back and write up my answers. Secant of 30 radians we found out was 6.48. Cosecant of 30 radians is the same as 1 over the sine of 30, and that's negative 1.01. And the cotangent of 30 is the same thing as the cosine of 30 over sine of 30, and our calculator told us that was negative 0.156. I forgot to write down up here that secant is the same thing as 1 over cosine of 30 radians. So that's that. Let's switch our calculator back into degree mode and get the answer for secant, cosecant, and cotangent for negative 120 degrees. If we clear all this off, press the mode button again. This time go down and over to degree. Degree is highlighted. Press enter. Quit out of here. And now I need 1 over cosine of negative 120, or cosine negative 120 reciprocal. The secant of 120 degrees negative is negative 2. Second question was the cosecant, so I need sine, one too many, negative 120 reciprocal. Cosecant of negative 120 degrees is negative 1.15, and then the cotangent is again cosine over sine, so I need cosine negative 120 divided by sine negative 120, and I get an answer of 0.577. So transferring those back to the other page. Secant of negative 120 degrees, and it's important to put the degree symbol there because that tells us we're not working in radians, we found out was negative 2. Cosecant negative 120 was negative 1.15, and the cotangent of negative 120 was 0.577. So that's it. That's how to evaluate trig functions, sine, cosine, any of the other 6, Using a calculator, you just need to make sure that your calculator is in the correct mode, either radian or degree, and you're going to be switching back and forth a lot, so it's a real good idea to always check to see what mode you're in.